I'll write the complete corrected story as one continuous piece. Let me start now. This will be a long output. The shipyard smelled like salt and tar, and something underneath that never quite went away. The smell of a place that had been soaked in work for so long, the wood itself remembered every hand that had ever touched it. Bryn drove the mallet into the hull plank before the sun had fully cleared the harbor wall, each strike sending vibrations up through her wrists and into her shoulders where the muscle bunched and released like rope being pulled through a pulley. She had been doing this since the dark. She would be doing this after the dark came back. That was the shape of her days. That had always been the shape of her days. Ashford Cove woke slowly around her. The harbor stretched out in a wide crescent, dotted with fishing boats that rocked in the early swell like sleeping animals. Beyond the breakwater, the Atlantic was flat and gray, the kind of gray that meant the fog would stay until noon and maybe longer. The main coastline curved away to the north, all granite and pine and stubborn beauty. The town climbed the hill behind the harbor in layers, clapboard houses with peeling paint, a white church steeple that leaned slightly east from a century of nor'easters, lobster traps stacked against fences, the kind of place that looked like a postcard and felt like a closed fist. You are going to split that timber if you keep hitting it like it owes you money. Harlan's voice came from the dock end. The old fisherman limped toward her, his left knee clicking with every step like a door that would not stay shut. 68 years had done their work on him. His hands were roped with veins and spotted with age. His back had a permanent curve from decades of hauling nets in weather that should have kept him indoors. But his eyes were sharp. They had always been sharp. They missed nothing about the harbor, or the weather, or the woman who worked in the shipyard before dawn. "It does owe me money," Bryn said without looking up. "Everything in this town owes me money. That is because you are the only one who fixes anything." Harlan lowered himself onto an overturned crate with the careful deliberation of a man negotiating with his own bones. The crate was his, had been his for years. He had worn a smooth spot in the centers that fit him exactly. No one else sat on it, no one else would dare. He produced a strip of dried fish from somewhere inside his coat. The coat had more pockets than seemed structurally possible. He tore the fish in half. "Eat, I ate, you did not." "How would you know?" "Because your hands are shaking. Hands shake when the body is running on spite instead of food. I have been watching you long enough to know the difference." Bryn took the fish. She did not thank him. She never thanked him. Gratitude was a door she kept sealed because opening it meant acknowledging that she needed what came through it. And need was a kind of debt. And Bryn did not do debt. "You are welcome," Harlan said to no one in particular. He pulled a length of net across his lap and began mending it with fingers that moved like they had their own memory. The twine whispered through his hands. He had been mending nets for over 50 years. His fingers knew the work the way roots know soil. The morning moved the way Ashford Cove mornings always moved. Slow, damp, reluctant. Fishing boats crawled out of the harbor like insects leaving a nest. Gulls argued over nothing on the breakwater. The fog thinned just enough to show the shape of things, but not their details. Everything was outline and suggestion. Bryn wiped her hands on her leather apron and headed toward the market square. Copper nails, pitch, resin. The kind of things that required walking past people who would rather she did not exist. She was tall, taller than most men in town by 2 or 3 inches. Her skin was green. Not the bright green of new leaves, but the deep green of old moss on stone. Weathered and rich and unmistakable. Her tusks were small, her mother's human blood softening what would have been prominent orc features, but they were there, visible. 2 small curves of ivory that caught the light when she spoke. Her arms were thick with muscle that ran from wrist to shoulder, like the grain and hardwood built by years of swinging mallets and bending planks and doing work that would have broken lighter bodies. Her hands were calloused and scarred and enormously capable. They could hold a timber beam steady in a gale. They could fit a plank to a curve with the precision of a watchmaker. They could also, when necessary, crack a walnut between thumb and forefinger, which she had done exactly once at a market stall to make a point about freshness. The square was half alive when she arrived. Fish vendors shouting prices that nobody believed. Children darting between stalls and games whose rules changed every 30 seconds. Women examining fabric with the focused intensity of generals studying maps before a campaign. The cobblestones were slick with morning damp and fish scales and the general residue of a town that made its living from the sea. Bryn moved through it all, finding the gaps between people, never touching the edges. She had learned this navigation as a child, how to walk through a crowd without disturbing it, how to take up less space than her body actually occupied. It was a skill she resented having and could not stop using. Morning, Bryn said old Wessler from behind his bread cart. He was one of the few who bothered. 73 and half deaf, and apparently the only person in Ashford Cove who had decided that being polite to an orc woman cost nothing and might even be the right thing to do. His bread was good. His heart was better. His hearing was terrible. Morning, rye loaf, just out of the oven, not today. You said that yesterday. I will say it tomorrow too. Wessler chuckled and went back to his bread. He had flour on his nose and did not know it. Bryn almost told him. Almost. She moved on. Halden's stall smelled like pine sap and turpentine. The supply merchant had her order waiting because she was his most reliable customer, and because the last time he had not had her order ready, she had stood at his stall in silence for 4 minutes while a line formed behind her, and every person in that line understood that the delay was his fault and not hers. He had not been late since. 3 bottles of resin. Halden said, eyes on his ledger. 2 pounds of copper nails. Pitch comes tomorrow. I need the pitch today. Tomorrow. Bryn leaned forward. She did not do it to intimidate. She did it because the stall was low and she was tall. But Halden's eyes dropped to her arms anyway, tracing the bands of muscle that were visible, even through her work shirt, and something in his face rearranged itself into cooperation. Today. I will have it by noon. Appreciate it. She turned to leave. 3 steps. That was all she got before the voice found her. Impressive negotiation technique. The voice was sharp and sweet in the way certain poisons are. The kind of voice that sounded like a compliment until you felt the sting. Vivian stood near the fabric stall with 2 other women. Her smile had edges hidden inside it, the kind that drew blood only after you had already smiled back. She was the council leader's wife, which in Ashford Cove meant she was the council leader who did not bother attending meetings because the meetings came to her. Her hair was silver blonde and immaculate. Her clothes were the nicest in town. She carried herself with the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once been told she was in the wrong place. Because for women like Vivian, every place was the right place. The world rearranged itself around her expectations. Honestly, Bryn, strength looks good on you, just like it looks good on the oxen pulling the cargo carts. Very similar energy. The 2 women laughed. One covered her mouth as if that made it less of what it was. The other did not bother covering anything. Bryn kept walking, same pace. Her jaw muscle twitched just once, then stone again. She had been hearing versions of this since she was tall enough to see over a market stall. Ox, bull, beast, creature. The words changed, but the shape of them was always the same. You are not one of us. You are something we use, something we tolerate when we need it and mock when we do not. The words landed on the same bruise every time, a bruise that never healed because it was never given the chance. She passed the well where 3 children were playing some game that involved a stick and a lot of shouting. The youngest froze mid-game when he saw her. It is the orc lady, the boy whispered. His eyes were wide, not with fear exactly, with the particular fascination children have for things they have been told are different. Do not stare, his older sister hissed, grabbing his arm. She can hear you. Bryn could in fact hear them. She could hear everything. The whispers, the silences that were louder than whispers. The way conversations dimmed when she entered a room and resumed when she left. She had memorized the rhythm of it. The brief pause, the lowered voices, the resumed chatter that pretended she had never been there. She was a cloud passing over someone else's sun, temporary, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. Back at the shipyard, Harlan was still on his crate, still mending. He looked up with the expression of a man who could read weather in a woman's walk. What animal today? Ox. Last week it was a bull. She is working her way through the farm. Bryn's mouth almost moved. Almost. The muscles twitched in the direction of a smile, and then thought better of it. One day you are going to actually laugh, Harlan said, and I will be so startled I will fall off this crate and wreck my other knee. Then I had better not laugh. You cannot afford that. See, that is concern, hidden under sarcasm but concern. He threaded a knot with the casual precision of someone who could do it in his sleep and frequently did. You are practically sentimental. Bryn picked up her mallet. Something in her chest was slightly lighter than before the market. She did not examine that feeling. Examining light moments too closely made them disappear like pressing on a soap bubble to see what it was made of. Better to let it sit. Better to keep working. Did the Henderson boy bring that keel plank I ordered? Change the subject, Harlan observed. Classic deflection. He jerked his thumb toward the timber pile at the back of the yard. Delivered an hour ago. Warped on the left side. Of course it is. I told him I would notice. He said it was fine. It is not fine, I know. But he is 17 and thinks he knows things. Harlan popped a knot tight. Give him time. We were all idiots at 17. Bryn picked up the warped plank and examined it. Her fingers ran along the grain, finding the twist, measuring the deviation. She could fix it. She could fix anything made of wood. That was not arrogance, that was fact. Her father had made sure of it. The wind shifted after midday, carrying the low groan of stressed timber across the harbor before anyone saw the source. The sound came first, always the sound. Bryn's ears were tuned to it. She could hear a loose joint in a hull from 50 yards. Could hear the difference between a plank under normal load and a plank about to fail. Wood talked if you knew how to listen. Her father had taught her that. Wood remembers he used to say, everything that has happened to it, every storm, every repair, every hand that shaped it, listen and it will tell you what it needs. The ship came in sideways, not the dramatic sideways of a vessel in genuine distress with signal flags and shouting in the theater of emergency, more the embarrassed sideways of something handled badly and trying not to show it. The hull bore a gash along the starboard side that looked like something had taken a bite out of it. Raw wood exposed beneath splintered planking. The kind of damage that made Bryn's professional eye narrow and her professional mind start calculating. Behind the main ship, 3 smaller cargo vessels followed in a ragged line, equally battered. They moved with the tentative caution of animals that had been hurt and were not sure the hurting was over. Merchant convoy Harlan observed from his crate. Hit the reef shelf outside Widow's Point. Who sails that close to Widow's Point? Someone who does not know the coast. Or someone in a hurry. Or someone stupid. Or all 3. I was being generous. The lead ship dropped anchor poorly. Too much chain. Not enough consideration for the tide. The kind of anchoring that told Bryn the captain was either inexperienced or distracted or angry. Probably all 3. A longboat was lowered and 3 men rowed toward the main dock. Their strokes were uneven, tired men in a tired boat coming from a tired ship. Harbor Master Brennan is going to love this, Harlan said. Brennan does not love anything except tide charts. True, but he especially does not love surprise repairs during fishing season. Bryn went back to her work. Damaged ships meant business. Business always found its way to her eventually. There was nowhere else for it to go. She was the only shipwright in Ashford Cove, the only one for 40 miles in either direction along the coast. This was her leverage and her prison. They needed her. They resented needing her. She fixed their boats and they avoided her eyes. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. An hour later, footsteps on her dock, heavy boots, confident stride, the walk of someone used to being in charge and used to that being enough. I am looking for the shipwright. The voice was male, mid-range, with the slight flatness of someone who had spent years shouting over wind and waves until his voice had been sanded down to its essentials. Bryn drove one more nail before answering. You found her, a pause. She could feel him recalculating behind her. Surprise first registering as a slight intake of breath, then confusion, a shifting of weight from one foot to the other, then something harder settling into place. Not hostility, something more complicated. The sound of a man's expectations being rearranged without his permission. You are the shipwright, Bryn looked up. The man on her dock was maybe 27. Lean the way sailors get lean, burned down to wire and sinew by salt air, and hard work and meals that were never quite enough. Sun-darkened skin that had seen more weather than most men his age. Hair the color of wet sand cut short but not short enough to be military. His left hand had a burn scar that wrapped around the knuckles like a vine, shiny and tight, and old enough to be part of him rather than something that had happened to him. His eyes were blue-gray, the color of the Atlantic on a day that could go either way. His eyes did the thing every newcomer's eyes did. Green skin, tusks, the shoulders, the arms, the quick inventory that always ended in the same place. What is she? It took about 3 seconds. She had timed it over the years. 3 seconds for a stranger to catalog everything about her that was not human and file it under whatever category they kept for things they did not understand. The harbor master said, "There is only one shipyard in Ashford Cove," he said carefully. The careful voice of a man choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on a slippery deck. "That is correct. And you run it." "Also correct." He looked back toward the harbor as if a second shipyard might have materialized while he was not paying attention. "Is there a problem?" Bryn asked. Her voice was flat, not hostile, just absent of anything that might be mistaken for eagerness to please. "No, no problem." Too quickly, the words tripping over each other in their hurry to sound normal. "I am Declan. Declan Morrow. That is my convoy. We hit the reef shelf. Widow's Point, right. The lead ship needs hull repair. Maybe a new mast. I need a timeline and a price." Bryn set down her mallet and stood to her full height. She had 2 inches on him. She watched him notice this, watched the small recalibration behind his eyes as his body registered that it was looking up instead of down or across. "I will inspect the hull before I give you a number, but from here you are looking at 4 weeks minimum." 4 weeks. The careful diplomacy cracked. Underneath it was a man running out of time and trying not to show it. She had seen this before. Captains and merchants and traders who came to her dock with damage they could not fix and deadlines they could not move, in the slowly dawning realization that they were at the mercy of a woman they had not expected and did not know how to handle. "I have cargo that needs to reach Thornwall by month's end. Can it be done faster? It can be done right, or it can be done fast. When it is a hull breach, you pick one." Declan exhaled through his nose. The sound of a man swallowing something he wanted to say and replacing it with something he needed to say. "Fine. 4 weeks, I said minimum. You also said you had not inspected it yet. I am giving you the optimistic version. Would you prefer the realistic one?" Declan stared at her. She could see him fighting something. Pride, maybe, or the frustration of a man used to having options who suddenly had exactly one. She knew that look. She had been that option for every sailor and fisherman in Ashford Cove for 4 years. The only option. The one they came to because there was no one else. Not because they wanted to. "What do you charge?" "I will tell you after I have seen the damage." "Ballpark. I do not do ballparks. I do accurate numbers after proper inspection." She picked up her mallet. "Bring the ship to the repair dock tomorrow morning. Low tide." He stared at her, trying to find another way, looking for the door that was not there, and slowly, with the reluctance of a man lowering a flag, realizing there was not one. Then he turned and walked back down the dock, his stride a fraction less confident than when he had arrived. Not defeated, just adjusted. Harlan watched him go. Charming fellow. He will be fine once he realizes he does not have a choice. He looked at you like you were a riddle he did not want to solve. People look at me like a lot of things. True, but that one is going to have to look at you every day for 4 weeks. Harlan almost smiled. That ought to be educational. The water at low tide was cold enough to make skin forget it had ever been warm, the kind of cold that bypassed discomfort and went straight to negotiation. The body bargaining with itself about how long it could endure. Bryn had been in this water thousands of times. Her body had stopped bargaining years ago. It simply endured. Declan brought the ship in as instructed with 2 of his crew trailing behind. Sully, the red-bearded first mate, who looked like he had been carved from a side of beef and spoke with the blunt confidence of a man who had never seen the point of subtlety. And a quiet one named Yannick, who said nothing but watched everything with dark, careful eyes. Bryn was already waist-deep in the harbor, running her hands along the hull breach. Firm pressure. Systematic. Reading damage with her fingertips as much as her eyes. She had learned this from her father. He used to say a ship will tell you what is wrong if you know how to listen with your hands. Every dent and crack and splinter had a story. Impact direction, force, angle, speed. The wood remembered and her fingers translated. "You did not just hit the reef," she said, pulling herself up onto the dock. Water ran off her in sheets, plastering her work clothes to the muscle beneath. You hit it, panicked, and hit it again, trying to pull away. Something shifted behind Declan's eyes, a flash of something exposed, a nerve touch that he had thought was buried deep enough. What makes you say that? The damage pattern. First impact here. Sharp, clean. That is the reef. But this, she indicated the upper damage with a dripping hand. Second strike, different angle. You turned too hard, too fast. The wheel went over before the hull cleared. Sully glanced at Declan with the particular expression of a first mate who has been proven right about something he was told to stop mentioning. She is right, Captain. Thank you, Sully, I am aware. Just confirming, sir. Stop confirming. Bryn wrung water from her hair. Thick, dark, cut short enough to stay out of her way, but long enough to be grabbed by the wind. She had not missed the look on Declan's face, the tightening of his jaw, the brief flash of something that might have been shame. She had just told his crew something he had not told them, that the second hit was not the reef's fault, it was the captain's, that he had panicked at the wheel and made the damage worse. She filed it away, not to use against him, not as leverage, just to know. Knowledge was a tool. The best tools were the ones you did not have to use. 4 weeks, not 3. Longer than I first estimated. That was before I saw what you did to the framing ribs. 3 of them cracked. 1 needs full replacement. I said minimum, if you recall. I recall. Good. The cost. She told him the number. She told it to him straight and clean without apology or explanation. She watched it land. A small flinch behind the eyes quickly controlled. The practiced composure of a man who knew what things cost and was used to paying more than he wanted to. That is steep. That is what it costs. I could get it done cheaper in Thornwall. You cannot get to Thornwall. That is why you are here. Sully made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh. Declan did not look at him. Half up front, half on completion. That is how I work. He counted out coins with the precise movements of a man who knew exactly how much he was losing. Each coin placed on the dock railing with a small click. Bryn counted them without appearing to. They were both exact. I will need to be here during the work, to oversee my ship, my shipyard. Bryn stepped in closer. The water on her skin caught the morning light. The muscle in her arms and shoulders was carved sharp from the cold, every line visible, every tendon defined beneath the green skin. You can watch, but stay out of my way. Touch my tools without asking, and you will swim back to your cargo boats. Declan held her gaze with the stubborn steadiness of a man who refused to blink first. It was the one thing about him she almost respected. Almost. Understood. Good. Be here at dawn, and eat before you come. I do not stop for meals. He lasted until mid-morning on the first day before his stomach made a sound like a small animal trapped in a barrel, loud enough that Bryn heard it over her own hammering. She reached into Harlan's third box without looking, pulled out a strip of dried fish and handed it to Declan without a word, without breaking the rhythm of her work, without acknowledging that the gesture meant anything at all. Where did this come from? Declan asked, examining the fish with the suspicion of a man who had learned to check things before eating them. Harlan, the old man on the crate. He is not on the crate right now. He is fishing. But his emergency provisions are in the third box from the left. He has emergency provisions at your shipyard. He has emergency provisions everywhere. The man is a logistical marvel trapped in a fisherman's body. You are welcome, she said, and heard the echo of Harlan's voice in her own. She did not know when she had started sounding like him. It had happened gradually the way all important things happen. Without announcement, without permission. Something shifted. The faintest crack in the wall between customer and craftsman. So small you would miss it if you were not paying attention. Bryn was not paying attention. She was working. But Harlan, returning from his fishing in the late afternoon with a bucket of clams and a look of mild satisfaction, noticed it immediately. He had been watching people for over 50 years. He knew what cracks looked like. He knew what they led to. He knew that the biggest changes always started with the smallest fractures. He sat on his crate and said nothing. Sometimes saying nothing was the most eloquent thing a man could do. The evening light was amber and low, stretching long shadows across the dock, when Harlan said the words Bryn had been dreading without knowing she was dreading them. Vivian is putting it to a vote. Something about the shipyard lease. Bryn went still, the mallet hovering over the plank like a held breath. My lease runs 3 more years. Leases can be reviewed, especially when the council leader's wife wants something. And Vivian always wants something. What does she want? The shipyard. For Celine. Bryn's grip tightened on the mallet. Celine. Vivian's daughter, 22 years old, had never held a hammer in her life, had never stepped onto a dock without complaining about the smell, had once asked Bryn what kind of wood boats were made of as if it were a single answer. Celine cannot build a rowboat. Vivian's idea is to bring in a shipwright from Cardanport. Have Celine manage the business side. Turn the yard into a proper enterprise. Her words, a proper enterprise, as opposed to whatever an orc woman running a shipyard by herself is. Bryn stood very still, the kind of still that was not calm, but was the opposite of calm, held in place by force. By years of practice at not breaking things when she wanted to break everything. She had learned this stillness from her father. He had learned it from necessity. When you are an orc in a human town, you learn to be still. Because movement can be mistaken for aggression. Because anger can be mistaken for threat. Because the line between expressing frustration and confirming every fear they have about you is thinner than a plank edge. When is the vote? Tonight. Who is on the council? Brennan, Halden, Vivian's husband obviously, old Wessler, and the new one, Tanith, runs the chandlery. Wessler might hold. Wessler is 73 and falls asleep during sessions. Harlan did not argue. He could not. They both knew the arithmetic. 5 votes. Vivian's husband was a guaranteed yes for whatever Vivian wanted. Halden would vote with whoever seemed like the safer choice, which was always the choice that did not involve an orc. Tanith was new and unknown. Brennan was neutral to a fault. Wessler was kind, but old and tired, intended to vote for whatever would end the meeting fastest. Bryn picked up the mallet and drove a nail. The sound rang across the harbor. Sharp, hard, louder than it needed to be. A sound that was not about the nail at all. Declan had gone for the evening. But the news about the vote reached him anyway. In Ashford Cove, news traveled downhill and into every crack. He was at the tavern that night, not drinking, just eating and listening the way a man does in a strange port when he wants to understand the currents before they pull him under. Vivian was at the corner table with Tanith the chandler. Their voices were low. The tavern was quiet. Declan was close. Close enough. The contract with Mercer in Cardanport was signed 3 months ago, Vivian said. She said it with the casual confidence of a woman discussing something already finished. He will arrive within the week of the vote. Everything is already arranged. The transition will be seamless. 3 months. Declan set down his fork. The food lost its taste. 3 months ago, before the vote, before the pretense of a proposal, before any of the democratic theater that was supposed to make this look fair. Vivian had signed a contract with a replacement shipwright 3 months ago. The vote was not a decision, it was a formality, a rubber stamp dressed up as deliberation. He left the tavern and walked to the harbor. The night air was cold and salt-heavy. The shipyard was dark. Bryn's cabin behind it showed a single lamp in the window, a small square of warm light in all that darkness. He stood on the dock for a long time looking at that light, thinking about a woman who had built her whole life on a foundation that someone was quietly pulling out from under her. Plank by plank, vote by vote, he almost knocked on her door, almost told her what he had heard. But he did not know how to say it without it sounding like pity. And something told him that pity was the one thing Bryn would never forgive. He went back to his ship and lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling and listened to the harbor breathe around him. Some things you have to tell at the right time. And some things once told change everything in ways you cannot take back. He would tell her tomorrow. He would figure out how. Fog clung to the dock the next morning, thick enough to taste. The kind of fog that made the world small and close and turned every sound into something muffled and intimate. Footsteps became suggestions. Voices became rumors. The harbor disappeared and only the nearest things existed. Declan arrived at dawn. He had not slept well. The words he had overheard sat in his chest like a stone he could not swallow and could not spit out. 3 months. The number kept repeating in his head with the dull insistence of a bell that would not stop ringing. He climbed the dock and found Bryn where she always was, inside the hull, working. The mallet strikes came steady and even, the rhythm of someone who had made peace with repetition a long time ago. Or at least had made a truce with it. "You are early," Bryn said without looking up. "You said dawn. Dawn was 20 minutes ago. You are early for tomorrow." He almost smiled. She almost noticed. Declan sat on his timber pile. The wood was damp and cold through his trousers. He watched her work, the way her hands moved with a certainty that came from years of doing the same thing until it became part of the body itself. She did not think about where to place the mallet. Her arms knew. Not from instruction, but from repetition so deep it had become instinct. He needed to tell her about Vivian, about the contract, about the fact that the vote was a show and the decision had been made months ago, in a quiet room somewhere while Bryn was working in her yard, not knowing that the ground beneath her was already being sold. "Hand me the draw knife," Bryn said. She was shaping a plank to fit the curve of the bow, her arms flexing with each pull of the blade, long curls of wood peeling away and falling to the dock like shed skin. The wood was beautiful in its transformation, rough becoming smooth, straight becoming curved, resistant becoming willing. Declan picked up the right tool. "First time." "You are learning," she said. "Had a good teacher. I have not taught you anything. You have taught me the difference between a chisel and a gouge. That is more than anyone has done in 27 years." He watched the shavings curl off the wood in long spirals. "And you taught me how to sand a boot print out of wet pitch, an essential life skill. What is the difference between your education and mine?" "Motivation. You taught me because you did not want to kill me." Declan laughed. "A real one. Not the polite kind that people use to fill silences, but the involuntary kind that escapes before you can catch it. Warm and unguarded and surprising to both of them." The sound bounced off the hull in the water and came back changed. Bryn paused. She looked at him. Not the quick assessment she had been giving him for 2 weeks. Something slower, something that lingered. What he said, noticing her expression? "Nothing. Hold this steady." They fitted a plank together, Declan pressing while Bryn nailed. The fog had lifted slightly, and a thin rain had started pattering on the oilcloth above them. The sound was close and rhythmic, and it made the space beneath the cloth feel separate from the rest of the world. A small pocket of shared work and shared air. "It is a different sound when it fits right," Declan said quietly. "The hammer. It rings different and higher, cleaner, like the wood is agreeing." Bryn paused mid-strike. She looked at him with something that was not surprise exactly, but was close to it, a recognition. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who saw her work as a service they purchased reluctantly. No one listened to the sound the hammer made. No one heard the difference between a plank that was forced into place and one that found its place willingly. Most people do not hear that. She drove the last nail home. The plank sang, a clean high note that meant the wood had found its place, that it was where it was supposed to be. They worked through the afternoon, and something changed in the rhythm between them. Not friendship. Bryn did not do friendship the way she did not do gratitude and did not do debt, but a working fluency emerged. She would say left, and he would know she meant his left, not hers. She would hold out her hand, and he would place the right tool in it without asking. A language of work that did not need words. It was near sundown when Declan finally spoke. The light was going gold and long, and the shadows were stretching toward evening. He had been carrying the words all day, and they had grown heavier with every hour until the weight of them was harder to bear than the saying. "I need to tell you something." Bryn was sealing the day's work with pitch. She did not stop. "I was at the tavern last night. Vivian was there with Tanith." Bryn's hands slowed but did not stop. The brush kept moving, the pitch kept spreading, but the rhythm had changed. Fractionally, almost imperceptibly. Bryn's rhythms did not change unless something mattered. She signed a contract with a shipwright from Cardanport 3 months ago, before the vote was even proposed. The replacement is already hired. The vote is a show. The sealing brush stopped. Bryn stared at the whole plank in front of her. Not at Declan, not at anything. Just at the wood, the grain, the knots, the small imperfections that told you where the tree had been wounded and where it had healed over the wound and kept growing anyway. 3 months, she said. The words were quiet, measured. The voice of someone holding something enormous very carefully so it would not spill. The vote is a formality. Everything is already arranged. Silence. The harbor sounds filled the space between them. Ropes against masts, water against stone. The distant cry of a gull that sounded almost like a question. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. Bryn set the brush down. She turned and looked at him. Her face was controlled. Every muscle in its place. The mask she had worn for 20 years. But her eyes were doing something he had not seen before. Not anger, something deeper and older than anger. The look of someone who has been betrayed by a place they refuse to stop loving. Because betrayal requires trust, and trust requires caring. And caring was the thing Bryn had spent her whole life pretending she did not do. Thank you, she said. The words came out like they had been dragged across gravel. Then she picked up her tools and walked toward her cabin without looking back. Declan watched her go. He did not follow. Some doors close for a reason. The wisdom is knowing which ones to respect. Harlan materialized from the thinning fog. He had a way of appearing when he was needed. An instinct for timing that had nothing to do with clocks and everything to do with 5 decades of paying attention. You told her, Harlan said, not a question. She needed to know. She did. Harlan sat on his crate. The wood creaked beneath him like an old friend complaining. But knowing and being able to do something about it are different animals entirely. She is not going to just let this happen. No, she is not. That is what worries me. He pulled out a clam and held it without opening it. The thing about Bryn is that she fights everything alone, always has. Her father was the same way. Built this whole yard by himself, buried himself in work until his heart gave out. She learned from the best how to do everything by herself, including the things nobody should do by themselves. The next morning, Bryn worked with an intensity that had nothing to do with carpentry. Every strike harder than it needed to be. Every nail-driven flush in a single blow. Every plank checked and rechecked with a precision that bordered on violence. She was building a wall inside herself and reinforcing it with anger and physical exhaustion and the simple, brutal math of keeping her hands busy so they could not shake. Declan sat on his timber pile and said nothing for 20 minutes. The smartest thing he had done since arriving in Ashford Cove. Harlan came at his usual time, fish in his coat, net in his lap. He took one look at Bryn and did not mention the vote, or Vivian, or contracts. Instead, he talked about the weather. Storm coming end of the week. Big one. Coming down from the North Atlantic. The lobstermen are already pulling their traps. Bryn kept working. But she heard him. She always heard. Always heard him. Section 4 of the breakwater. I patched it last spring, but the foundation is shifting. 2 of the base stones have moved since the autumn. Harlan nodded. Your father built that section. I know what my father built. The old man went quiet. He mended his net. The twine whispered through his fingers with the sound of patience being practiced. After a while, he spoke again. Soft. Your father built a lot of things in this town, he said. Most of them do not know it. Most of them do not want to know it. They walk on docks he built and moor boats to cleats he forged and shelter behind walls he raised, and they do not once think about the hands that did the building. That is not your burden. That is their blindness. Bryn drove a nail flush. The sound was off. Too hard. Too angry. She did not correct it. The evening came gray and early. The days were getting shorter. Autumn was settling over Ashford Cove with the slow determination of something that intended to stay. Declan stayed late at the shipyard. Bryn was sanding the new planks by lantern light when he sat down on the dock across from her. You told me something real yesterday, he said, about the contract. I owe you something real back. You do not owe me anything. You are paying for the repair. Not money. A story. You gave me truth. I owe you truth. You do not have to. My ship did not hit the reef because I did not know the coast. Bryn waited. Her hands kept sanding, but the rhythm slowed. Back and forth. Slower now. I knew about Widow's Point. Sailed this stretch twice before. Sully warned me we were too close. I could hear the waves on the shelf. I knew. She stopped sanding. I was pushing for speed because I was behind schedule because I had lost 2 weeks in Thornwall drinking instead of loading cargo. Sitting in a tavern, staring at the bottom of a glass and looking for something that was not there. His voice was even, rehearsed from too many times alone in his bunk talking to a ceiling that never answered back. 7 months ago, storm off the Ashen Coast. Big one. The kind that turns the whole sky black and makes the ocean stand up on its hind legs. I made a call, tried to outrun it instead of sheltering. Everyone else went to port. I kept sailing, told myself I knew these waters, told myself the ship could handle it, told myself a lot of things that made me feel like a captain instead of a fool. The lantern flame bent in the evening breeze. Shadows moved across the hull like living things. The ship went down. Middle of the night, 1 minute we were fighting the swells and the next the whole starboard side was underwater and the mast was coming down. I got most of the crew into the longboats. Most of them. 4 did not make it. 4 men who trusted me to make the right call. I made the wrong one. Anyone else hurt this time? No. Then you did learn something. You just learned it slowly. That is generous. It is not generous. Losing 4 people because of a bad call, that does not go away. It should not go away. If it went away, it would mean you did not care. The fact that you carry it means it mattered. Still sailing, still making calls. Bryn picked up the sandpaper. That is not running from it. That is carrying it. Is there a difference? Running is fast. Carrying is slow. You are slow. She sanded a long stroke down the plank. I mean that as a compliment. First one you have given me. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not strained. The silence between 2 people who had each set something heavy down and were resting beside it. Breathing, looking at the weight of what they had shared and not flinching. Your turn, Declan said. My turn for what? Something real. Bryn sanded for a while. The sound filled the space around them. Rhythmic, steady, the sound of patience and precision and hands that never stopped working. My father did not come to Ashford Cove because of the harbor. He came because he was running. From Kargath, Orc territory, north of the mountains, past the forests and the river valleys and the places where the land gets hard and cold. She paused. The sandpaper rested on the plank. Clan law. The kind that says Orc men do not fall in love with human women. The kind that does not have exceptions. The kind that is enforced by people who believe that blood must stay pure and that love is a threat to everything they have built. Declan was quiet, not the silence of someone who did not know what to say. The silence of someone who knew that saying nothing was the right thing. My mother was human. She died when I was 3. Fever. My father raised me here alone, an Orc man with a half-Orc daughter in a human fishing town. He built this shipyard with nothing, no money, no help, no welcome, just his hands and his knowledge and his stubborn refusal to be anywhere else. Her jaw tightened, the way it always tightened when she talked about her father, which was almost never. The town tolerated him because they needed him. That was the deal. He fixed their boats and they let him stay. Not welcomed, tolerated. He taught me everything. How to read wood, how to swing a mallet, how to build a hull that could take anything the Atlantic threw at it. He said reading was optional, but boats were not. He put a mallet in my hands when I was 8, and I have not put it down since. Her hands stopped. She stared at the plank beneath her fingertips. Winter, 4 years ago. His heart stopped in the middle of a repair. Just stopped. No warning, no sickness. He was in the hull of a fishing boat fitting a rib, and his heart decided it was done. I found him, tools still in his hands, face against the wood, like he had fallen asleep, except he had not. She resumed sanding. The sound was softer now, slower. Harlan helped me bury him, behind the yard, under the oak tree where he used to sit on Sunday mornings and smoke his pipe and look at the harbor and not say anything. We dug the hole together. Harlan and me. It was January. The ground was frozen. It took us all day. What about the town? Did anyone come? He was an Orc. I am an Orc. People use our work, but they do not mourn us. Not a single person came. Not Wessler, not Brennan, not anyone. The man had lived here for 20 years, built half the harbor, fixed every boat, and when he died, the town acted like a tool had broken. Inconvenient but replaceable. Declan stood up from his timber pile. He took 3 steps toward her, close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. The distance of someone who understood that proximity was an offer and not a demand. I would have come. You were not here, I know, but I would have. Go get some sleep, Declan. You too. I will finish this plank first. He walked toward town. At the dock's end, he paused. The darkness was settling over the harbor. Lanterns on the boats cast small circles of light on the water. Bryn, that sound. When the hammer rings right, I will listen for it tomorrow. She did not answer, but she did not tell him not to come. For Bryn, that was practically an invitation. Harlan's voice drifted from the darkness of his skiff, where he had been sitting unseen for the last hour. Listening, not eavesdropping, just present. The way he was always present. He would have come to the funeral. Go to sleep, Harlan. I am just saying. You are always just saying. That is because someone has to. A pause, the water lapped against the dock. Good night, Bryn. Good night. She sanded the plank until it was smooth as water. Then she covered the hull and put away her tools and walked back to the small cabin behind the shipyard where she lived alone. The cabin smelled like sawdust and her father's pipe tobacco, even though he had been gone 4 years. She had tried airing it out once, opened every window, left the door open for a whole day. It did not work. The smell was in the walls, in the floorboards, in the beams he had cut and shaped and fitted with his own hands. Eventually she stopped trying. Eventually she realized she did not want it to go away. 4 days later, the rhythm between Bryn and Declan had settled into something neither of them had named, and neither of them was willing to examine too closely. She would work. He would watch. Then she would need something held or steadied or passed, and he would do it. Badly at first, then less badly, then almost well. Strength looks good on you, Declan said. He said it quietly. At the end of a long afternoon of work, he said it like he had been holding the words for days and they had finally slipped out past whatever guard he had posted to stop them. Bryn froze. The draw knife went still in her hands. The shaving she had been pulling curled and fell. I do not mean. I am not. Do not. I just mean that watching you work. I said do not. Bryn's voice was flat, not angry, controlled. The way someone sounds when they have heard something before, and it always came with a cost. When someone says those words to me, she said after a long pause. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the plank, at the wood grain, at anything that was not his face. They say it with different faces. Vivian says it to remind me I am an animal. Men in other ports said it like I was something exotic to stare at, a curiosity, a spectacle, something to describe to their friends later. Did you hear about the orc woman who builds ships? Can you imagine? That is not what I know what you did not mean. But when someone says those words to me, I do not hear what they mean. I hear what everyone else meant. Every time, every face, every version of those words that was really saying something else entirely. Declan sat with that. He did not argue, did not defend himself, did not explain that he was different or that she was being unfair, any of the things a man says when he wants to be the exception. I understand, he said finally. Do you? No, probably not. But I understand that I do not understand, which is at least a place to start. That is a lot of understanding for one sentence. I am a complicated man. You are a man who cannot tell a chisel from a gouge. I am a complicated man who is learning. Harlan materialized at the dock's edge, dripping wet from his skiff, carrying a bucket of clams with the quiet pride of a man who had wrestled dinner from the ocean and won. Brought dinner, he announced. It is 2 in the afternoon, Bryn said. Brought early dinner. He looked between them with the instinct of someone who could sense tension the way fishermen sense weather. A shift in the air, a change in pressure. What did I miss? Nothing, Bryn said. Nothing, Declan said. 2 people saying nothing at the same time usually means something happened. He set the bucket down on the dock with a solid thunk. Clams. Fresh. I will take some, Declan said. Good, because I brought enough for 3, and I refuse to eat them alone again. Harlan settled onto his crate with the careful ceremony of a man returning to his throne. He cracked a clam with practiced efficiency. Eating clams alone is the saddest thing a man can do. I have been doing it for 6 years. 6 years, Declan asked, since my wife passed. Eleanor, she hated clams, could not stand the sight of them. 34 years of marriage and not once did a clam cross our threshold. I can finally eat them in peace. I'm sorry. Do not be. She hated clams, but she loved everything else. Love is complicated that way. You miss someone terribly and also enjoy the things they would not let you do. I miss her every day, and I eat clams every day. Both things are true. Bryn took a clam. She did not say anything, but she sat down on the dock next to Harlan's crate, something she rarely did before the work was finished. The three of them ate clams in the afternoon. Nobody said much. The harbor stretched out around them. The fog was lifting. The boats were coming back. It was the closest thing to comfortable Bryn had felt in years, and she noticed herself noticing it, and she hated herself a little for that, because comfortable was dangerous. Comfortable was a door that opened onto need, and need was a debt she could not afford. The air smelled wrong 3 days later, iron and distance and something cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The way the wind smells when it blows from the northern mountains instead of the sea. Bryn noticed it before she noticed the riders. She always noticed the air first. The air never lied. 3 of them, coming down the coast road on horses too large and too dark for normal stock. Massive beasts bred for rough terrain. Mountain horses, orc horses. Their hooves were the size of dinner plates, and they moved with a heavy, deliberate rhythm that shook the ground. Her hands tightened on the mallet. She knew those horses. She knew the banner carried by the second rider. A black field with a cracked tusk in silver. The sigil of Kargath. Expecting visitors, Harlan asked from his crate. His voice was casual, but his eyes were not. No, then this ought to be exciting. Declan was inside the hull fitting a brace. He heard the hoofbeats and climbed out, squinting against the light. "Who is that?" Trouble Bryn said. The lead rider dismounted at the edge of the shipyard. He was massive, taller than Bryn by half a head, shoulders like a door frame that had been reinforced for war. Full orc, green skin darker than hers, the deep green of forest shadow. Tusks that curved up past his cheekbones like carved ivory. Scars across his arms and hands that told stories of fights won not by cleverness, but by refusing to go down. Kragan. Nice. He surveyed the shipyard with slow, deliberate eyes, taking in the timber stacks, the tools, the half-repaired hull, the dock, the crate. He looked at it all with the expression of a man surveying something he had already decided was beneath the woman standing in it. His eyes passed over Harlan the way they would pass over furniture. When they landed on Declan, they stopped. Hard. Measuring. The look of a predator assessing whether something was a threat or a nuisance. Who is the human? A client. A client who lives in your shipyard. A client whose ship I am repairing. Is there a reason you are here? Or did you miss the smell of fish? Your mother sent me. Bryn's jaw tightened. Just for a second. A crack in the stone that she sealed immediately. I do not have a mother. You have a clan, whether you acknowledge it or not. A clan that threw my father out for loving the wrong woman. Your father made his choice. Kragan's voice was not cruel. It was matter of fact. The voice of a man stating the terms of an equation he had not written but was required to enforce. We are offering you a different one. Kragan stepped closer. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and something metallic. Orc forges burned hotter than human ones. The smell lingered in the skin, in the hair, in the bones. The clan needs builders, real builders, ships, bridges, fortifications. Come back to Kargath. Build for your own people. These are my people. Kragan laughed, short, hard. The sound had no joy in it, only the bitter amusement of someone watching a younger person make a mistake he had seen before. These people, the ones who call you an ox, who are voting to take your shipyard, who tolerated your father for 20 years and did not come to his funeral. How do you know about the vote? News travels when someone wants it to. He glanced at Declan again. The look lasted a beat too long. In Kargath, you would have a forge, a home, a place where your strength is honored instead of mocked. You would be useful instead of tolerated. I am not tolerated. I am necessary. That is a smaller word than you think. Declan stepped forward. He did not plan it. It came from the same place inside him that made him try to outrun storms instead of sheltering. The part of him that moved before it thought. She is more than necessary here. This is not your conversation, human. Kragan did not look at him. The dismissal was total. A man swatting away something too small to bother killing. He is right, Bryn said. Both men looked at her. It is not your conversation, Declan. Declan's mouth opened, closed. He stepped back. The look on Bryn's face was not anger at him. It was something worse. Exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of a woman who had spent her entire life having people speak about her and for her and around her and over her while she stood right there. Present, capable, ignored. Bryn faced her uncle, shorter, lighter, younger. But something in her posture was equal to his. Something that could not be measured in inches or pounds or years. Something that came from the same place inside both of them. The place where stubbornness becomes identity. I will think about it. Do not think too long. I will be at the inn for 3 days. Kragan mounted his horse. The beast stood steady beneath him. Patient. Dangerous. 3 days, Bryn. Then I ride back with or without you. The riders headed toward town. Bryn watched them go. Her knuckles white around the mallet handle. White enough that the green skin went pale at the joints. Bryn Declan started. Do not. I know what you were and I do not need you to defend me. Not to Vivian, not to Kragan, not to anyone. I was not defending you. I was telling a clan war chief that Bryn's voice went quiet, which was worse than shouting. Much worse. Shouting was release. Quiet was containment. And the things Bryn contained could level buildings. Do you know what that looked like? A human man speaking for an orc woman. In front of her uncle, in front of his riders, as if I needed you to explain my value, as if my worth was something that required your testimony. That is not what I meant. It does not matter what you meant. It matters what it looked like. And it looked like every other time someone has decided they know what is best for me. Every time someone has stepped in front of me to speak because they could not believe I could speak for myself, she turned back to the hull and began working with precise, controlled force. Every strike exactly where it needed to be and harder than it needed to be. The nails sank flush in single blows. The planks trembled. Harlan sat on his crate. He had a clam in his hand. He was not eating it, just holding it. He was trying to help, Harlan said mildly. I do not need help. You do not. He popped the clam into his mouth. But sometimes people offer it anyway. Not because they think you are weak, because they think you are worth standing next to. Bryn's hammer struck the plank. The sound was off, harsh, wrong. The ring of wood that has been hit with anger instead of intention. She pulled the nail and started over. Harlan watched her for a while. Then he went back to his net and did not say anything else. The old man knew when to talk and when to let the silence do the work. He had had decades of practice, most of it on this crate, most of it watching people he cared about make the mistakes they needed to make. The next morning, Declan did not come to the shipyard. Bryn told herself she did not notice. She noticed. She noticed the empty timber pile, the absent sound of someone shifting their weight on damp wood, the missing questions about tools, the quiet that was wrong because it was the wrong kind of quiet. He came in the late afternoon, climbing the dock with the careful steps of a man who knew he might not be welcome and was coming anyway because something mattered more than welcome. Where were you this morning, Bryn said. She had not meant to ask. The words came out before the wall could stop them. The inn, talking to Kragan. Bryn went still, the mallet hovering in the air between one strike and the next. A frozen moment. You what? I went to tell him. To tell him that you belong here, that the shipyard is yours, that this town needs you. Stop. Her voice was ice, not the solid kind, the cracked kind, the kind that is about to give way beneath you and drop you into something deep and cold. You went to a clan war chief with 30 riders, the man who is trying to take me to Kargath, and you told him what I should do with my life. I was trying to help. I do not need your help. The words echoed off the hull, the water, the stone saw wall. They bounced back and forth in the harbor like something that could not find a place to land. I do not need Kragan deciding where I belong. I do not need Vivian deciding what I deserve. And I do not need you deciding what I am worth. Declan stood in the rain that had started without anyone noticing. He looked like a man watching something break that he did not know how to fix. Because he was a fixer. That was his instinct, to act, to intervene, to do something. And for the first time in his life, doing something was the wrong thing. Then what do you need? I need everyone to stop acting like I am a problem to be solved. Silence. The rain fell on the dock and the water in the hull of his damaged ship. "You are right," Declan said. "I am sorry. Go oversee your ship." "Bryn, go." He went. Bryn watched him walk down the dock, shoulders hunched against the weather, getting smaller. She hated how much she noticed the shape of him leaving, hated the way his absence registered as a change in the weight of the air around her. Harlan cracked a clam. "He will be back." "I know. That is why he will be back." "That does not make sense. It makes perfect sense. You just do not want it to." Bryn picked up a new plank, set it against the hull, measured, marked. "Harlan, if I leave, if I go to Kargath, what happens to you?" The old man stopped mending. He looked at her for a long moment, his weathered face, his bright, steady eyes, the years in them, the losses, the mornings and the evenings and the tides he had watched come in and go out. Every one of them counted somewhere in the lines of his face. "I keep fishing," he said. "I eat clams alone. I sit on this crate until it rots, or I do, whichever comes first." That is bleak. That is accurate. He went back to his net. "But I would manage. I managed before you and your father showed up. I would manage after. You are a terrible liar. I am an excellent liar. I just choose not to be with you." Bryn drove the nail. The plank held. The sound was right this time. Clean, true, the sound of something fitting where it belonged. That evening, Harlan brought more news. His face was tight in a way she had come to recognize. Bad news face. The face that came before words she did not want to. "Your Kragan went to see the council yesterday." Bryn's hands went still. Everything went still. The mallet, the wind, her breath. "He offered them a deal. If they revoke your lease, he guarantees a trade route through Kargath. Orc timber, Orc iron, half the price of Cardanport supplies. He is buying them. He is negotiating, which to be fair is what he is good at. And Vivian is telling everyone, this solves everything. You go back to your people. Celine gets the shipyard. Ashford Cove gets cheap materials from Kargath. Everybody wins," Neat Bryn said. "Everyone gets what they want. Not everyone. Tell me who is fighting it, Harlan. One person on that council who will say the Orc woman stays." Harlan was quiet. The wind off the harbor was cold and getting colder. The season was turning. You could feel it in the air. Wessler fell asleep during the last session, voted yes on a fishing tax he did not know about, woke up and asked what he had missed. "So I am one sleeping old man away from losing my yard." That is one way to phrase it. Bryn picked up the mallet and hit the plank. The sound rang across the harbor. Sharp. Too hard. The plank cracked, a clean line running through the grain, splitting it in two. She stared at the broken wood. The third plank she had cracked this week. 3 planks destroyed by her own force, by the anger she could not put anywhere because there was nowhere safe to put it. "Want to talk about it," Harlan said gently. "No, want me to stay, yes." Harlan stayed. He did not talk. He just sat in the cold fingers working the net, present, steady, unmovable. Because that was what he did. That was what he had always done. He showed up, he stayed, he did not leave. The storm arrived 2 days before Kragan's deadline, as if the sea had its own opinion about timing and had decided that everyone in Ashford Cove needed to be reminded who was actually in charge. It came from the northwest, a wall of black cloud that swallowed the horizon. The barometric pressure dropped so fast that Bryn felt it in her teeth before she saw it in the sky. A deep ache in the bones of the dock, a vibration running through the wood and the water and the stone, the vibration of something enormous approaching, something that did not care about councils or votes or leases or the small human dramas playing out on a thin strip of coast between the mountains and the sea. "That is a bad one," Harlan said. He was already on the dock, already tying down his skiff with hands that moved faster than his knee would allow the rest of his body to follow. He cursed the knee quietly, then apologized to it, then cursed it again. He had been having this argument with his body for 20 years. Worse than the autumn storms, Bryn said. She was standing at the edge of the dock, looking out at the harbor. The breakwater stretched across the mouth of it, massive stone and timber. The wall that stood between every boat and every livelihood in Ashford Cove and the open Atlantic. Her father had built the original structure when she was a child, She remembered sitting on the dock as a girl, watching him wade into the shallows with beams on his shoulders. He had not asked for help. No one offered. He built it because it needed building, and he was the one who knew how. The breakwater, she said. What about it? Section 4. I patched it last spring, but the foundation is shifting. 2 of the base stones have moved since the autumn. The mortar is cracking. If it goes, every boat in the harbor takes the full swell. Harlan looked at the sky, then at the water, then at her. His face was steady. Waves are already cresting the lower sections. I know. Footsteps on the dock. Fast. Running. Declan. He had come from the direction of town. His coat was wet. His eyes were wide with the specific fear of a man who could read weather and did not like what he was reading. 3 days of silence between them. 3 days since she had told him to go. 3 days since the wall had gone up between them higher and thicker than before. None of that mattered now. The storm did not care about their silence. The storm did not care about anything. What do we do, he said. Not what can I do, not how can I help, not let me fix this. What do we do? As if they were already a team, as if the 3 days had been a pause and not an ending. Bryn looked at him. Rain was starting, heavy drops that hit the dock like small fists. The breakwater. Section 4. If it fails, everything in the harbor is exposed. My crew can help. Sully is strong, Yannick and Sable too. This is not rope work. This is timber and stone in 10-foot swells. Then tell us what to do. Bryn hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. The wind was picking up. Somewhere in the harbor, a loose halyard was slapping against a mast with a sound that marked time. A countdown. Get your crew. Section 4. Now. The breakwater was chaos. Waves hammered the wall with the force of something trying to get in. The Atlantic had turned from gray to black, and it was throwing itself against the stone and timber with a fury that was not personal, but felt personal. Spray erupted over the top of the wall in sheets of white. The wind was a physical force. It pushed against their bodies like hands. It screamed in their ears. It tried to pull them off the wall and into the churning darkness below. There, Bryn shouted over the wind. She was pointing to the weakest joint in the Section 4. A gap where the cross brace had failed. Seawater was pouring through with each wave, undermining the foundation, pulling the base stones loose. The whole section was groaning. She could hear it above the storm, the sound of timber under more stress than it was built for, the sound of something about to give up. Cross brace is gone. We need new timber before the next big set. Sully looked at the gap. 4 feet of churning water between the wall and the open ocean, foam and debris and the dark sucking pull of the undertow. His red beard was plastered to his face. His eyes were calculating the kind of math that soldiers and sailors calculate. The math of risk. You want us to go in there. I want me in there. I need you on the safety line. That is insane, Declan said. The words came out before he could stop them, and he regretted them instantly because he saw her face change. He saw the wall come down. Not the wall she kept between herself and the world. The other wall. The wall that kept her anger contained. That is my harbor. It is everyone's harbor. It is mine. I built half this wall with my father when I was 14. I know every joint, every bolt, every weak point, every stone he placed. I was there when he placed them. I handed him the mortar. I held the braces while he drove the spikes. I know this wall better than anyone alive. She was already tying the rope around her waist. The knot was precise, fast, a bowline modified with a half hitch. The kind of knot her father had taught her before she could read because he said reading was optional, but knots were not. The 8-foot beam. There, hand it to me. That beam weighs, I know what it weighs. Declan and Sully lifted it together, straining. 2 strong men with their teeth clenched and their boots sliding on the wet stone. Every muscle engaged, every tendon visible. Bryn took it with one arm braced against the wall, the other arm wrapped around the beam. She held it steady. The weight that had taken 2 men to lift she held with the practiced ease of someone who had been carrying things too heavy for her since she was 8 years old. Sully breathed something that was lost in the wind. Bryn waded into the gap. The water hit her waist. then her chest, cold enough to stop thought, cold enough to make the body forget everything except the primal screaming need to get out of the water. Every nerve, every cell, every instinct saying leave. She did not leave. She braced the beam against the failing section and held it while a wave crashed over her head. "Bryn!" Declan shouted. His voice was torn apart by the wind. He could not see her. The wave had swallowed her whole. The rope went taut in his hands and he held it with everything he had. She surfaced, sputtering, coughing, water streaming from her face, still holding the beam. Her arms were shaking, but her grip was iron, because iron was what she was made of. Iron and oak and the stubborn, unreasonable refusal to let go of the things that mattered. The mallet. Throw it. Declan threw, overhand, into the storm, into the dark. She caught it one-handed, in the chaos, in the spray, with one arm holding an 8-foot beam against a failing wall. "Hold the line," she shouted. She drove the first spike. 3 strikes. Precise. Even in the chaos. The sound of the mallet rang out above the storm. Clean, right. The sound that meant the wood had found its place. Second spike. Third. "Next wave," Sully yelled. It hit. A wall of black water that slammed into the breakwater and exploded over the top. Bryn disappeared beneath it. The safety line went taut. Declan grabbed it with both hands, hauled. His palms burned. The rope cut into his skin. Sully grabbed the line behind him. Yannick behind Sully. She came up. Still there. Still holding. Still refusing. The beam held. The wall groaned but stayed. 2 more beams, Bryn shouted. Same size. Move. They worked for 2 hours. Bryn in the water, Declan and the crew above, passing timber, holding lines, shouting over the wind. The storm threw everything it had, rain, wind, waves in sets of 3 that hit the wall with the force of something that had traveled 1,000 miles across open ocean for the express purpose of breaking whatever was in its path. Harlan was on the wall too. No one had asked him to come. No one could have stopped him. He was directing, pointing, his voice cutting through the wind with the authority of a man who had been on this water for over 50 years and had decided that this storm was not going to be the one that beat him. His knee was screaming. He did not care. His hands were bleeding from the rope. He did not notice. He was doing what he had always done, showing up, staying, refusing to be anywhere else. Halfway through the second hour, a sound came from the north end of the breakwater, a deep crack that cut through the wind and the waves and the chaos like a gunshot. The sound of stone splitting, the sound of failure. "Section 2, Harlan shouted. His voice was hoarse. His face was white. Section 2 was the section the town had repaired themselves the previous year. Town contractors, cheap timber, poor joints, corners cut to save money. It was failing. Bryn heard it from the water. She looked north towards Section 2. Then she looked south toward the shipyard. Her shipyard, her father's shipyard, her tools, her timber stores, the cabin that still smelled like his pipe tobacco. Section 4 protected the main harbor and the repair dock where Declan's ship sat. If she left Section 4 unfinished, the dock would be exposed. The ship, the shipyard, everything she had, Section 2 protected the northern dock. The fishing fleet, every boat that belonged to every fisherman in Ashford Cove, every net, every trap, every livelihood. The boats of the people who called her an Auckland, who were voting to take her yard, who had not come to her father's funeral. She did not hesitate, not for a second. "Declan, pull me up." He pulled. She came out of the water dripping and shaking. Her arms were trembling from 2 hours of holding beams that took 2 men to lift. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale beneath the green. "Section 2, she said. "That is the fishing dock, not your section, not your wall. I know what it is, your shipyard. My shipyard can take a hit. Those boats cannot. Bryn, those are their boats, their nets, their lives. If those boats go down, this town has nothing. I can rebuild a dock. They cannot rebuild a fleet." She grabbed rope and timber and ran along the top of the breakwater towards Section 2. The wind hit her sideways. She leaned into it. Declan ran behind her. Sully and the crew followed. They did not ask why. They did not need to. They had watched her hold a wall together with her bare hands for 2 hours. They would follow her anywhere. Section 2 was worse than 4. The town's repair work had been cosmetic, pretty on the surface, rotten underneath. The stones were loose. The timber was splitting along the grain. Water was pouring through in 3 places. The whole section was shifting, moving, coming apart in slow motion. Bryn went in again. The water was colder now, or she was colder. The difference no longer mattered. Her arms almost failed on the first beam. Almost. The muscles screamed. The joints protested. Her body sent every signal it had that it was done, that it had given everything, that there was nothing left. She held. She gritted her teeth and held. Because that was what she did. Because that was what her father had built her for. Because 40 feet behind this wall were boats that belonged to people who would never thank her, and she was going to save them anyway. She drove the spikes, held the next beam, drove more spikes. The world narrowed to the mallet and the wood in the water. Nothing else existed. Nothing else mattered. Just the next spike, the next beam, the next wave. 40 minutes, 6 beams, 18 spikes, the section held. When she climbed out the second time, she collapsed on the breakwater's top. Flat on her back, arms spread wide, rain falling on her face. She could not lift her hands, could not close her fists. The muscles had given everything and there was nothing left. 40 spikes in 2 hours, beams that took 2 men to lift, in water cold enough to kill. Declan sat next to her, both soaked, both shaking, both looking out at a harbor that was still intact, every boat still floating, every mast still standing. Harlan appeared above them. He looked at the repair, at Bryn, at the harbor. His weathered face was wet, rain, or something else. In the dark and the storm, it was impossible to tell, and he would never say. "Strength looks good on you, girl." He said it dry and plain. The way you say the ocean is deep or the sky is wide. Not a compliment, not a performance. A simple statement of fact from a man who had watched her grow up and had never once been surprised by what she could do. Only proud of it. His voice cracked on the last word. Just barely, just enough. Bryn looked up at him, the old man who brought her fish every morning, who had helped dig a grave in frozen January ground, who sat on a crate in every kind of weather because someone had to be there, and he had decided that someone was him. "You are a mess," she said. "Look who is talking." He extended his hand. She took it, held it for a moment. His hand was thin and strong and bleeding from the rope and warm despite everything. Then she stood. Sully stood over them. His red beard was plastered to his face like a wet flag. His eyes were wide. "Captain, I would like to formally state that your shipwright is terrifying." "She is not my shipwright," Declan said. "I am not his shipwright," Bryn said at the same time. "Right. Someone else's terrifying shipwright. I am not anyone's anything." "That part," Sully observed, "I absolutely believe." They ate cold clams on the breakwater at 1 in the morning. 6 people who had no business being anything to each other. Bryn, Declan, Harlan, Sully, Yannick, Sable. The storm was easing, the wind was dying, the waves were settling back into something that resembled rhythm instead of rage. The sky was clearing from the west, and the first stars were showing through. So Sully said, cracking a clamshell with his thick fingers, "The council is still voting on your lease. I am asking because if they vote to replace the woman who just saved every boat in this harbor, then this town is dumber than I thought. And I already thought it was pretty dumb." Bryn looked at him, then at Yannick and Sable. 3 strangers who had followed her into a storm because their captain trusted her, who had held the line while she drove spikes into timber in 10-foot swells, who were now eating her friend's clams and sitting on a breakwater at 1 in the morning as if this were a perfectly normal thing to do. "Thank you," she said. The words came out rough, unused, rusty from years of not being spoken. She said them anyway, for holding the line. Sully looked startled. Then he cracked another clam. "Anytime." "Well, not anytime, maybe not in weather like this again. But generally speaking, the morning after the storm, the harbor smelled like washed stone and survival, battered, bruised, but standing. Bryn walked the breakwater at dawn, alone. The sky was clear for the first time in days. The Atlantic was flat and calm, as if it had exhausted itself and was resting. Section 4. Holding. Her work. Solid. Every spike driven true. Every beam fitted tight. Section 2. Holding. Her work. Solid. The section that protected the fishing fleet. The boats of the people who called her an ox. Who wanted her gone. Still floating. Still intact. Because she had chosen them. The shipyard had taken damage. A section of the dock was cracked. Some timber stores were soaked. The oilcloth over the hull repair had torn in the wind, and rainwater had gotten into the fresh planking. 2 days of extra work. Maybe 3. But the ship was intact. The hull was intact. The yard was still standing. She was assessing the damage when Kragan came. Alone this time. No riders, no banner. Just an orc man walking down a dock in the early morning light. He moved differently without his retinue. Lighter, less performed. More like the uncle she had never really known, and more like the brother her father had left behind. "I heard about last night," he said. The innkeeper could not stop talking. The orc woman who saved the harbor, who held the breakwater together with her bare hands while the town slept. He said it without mockery, with something that might have been pride, the kind that surprised the person feeling it, as if he had come to Ashford Cove expecting to find a niece who was wasting her talents and had found something else entirely. "Is this the part where you tell me I should do that for Kargath? This is the part where I ask one more time. Come home, Bryn. This is my home. A town that was voting to throw you out 2 days ago. A town that I saved last night. And tomorrow when the storm is forgotten and Vivian starts again, then I will save them again. Or I will not. Either way, I will be here. Why? Because my father built this yard. Because Harlan is here. Because I know every timber in that breakwater by name. Because I have been sanding these docks since I was 8 years old, and every board remembers my hands." She paused. "Because leaving would mean they were right about me, that I do not belong here, and they are not right." Kragan studied her. Same green eyes, same stubborn jaw, same refusal to look away first. He was seeing his brother in her face. The man who had left Kargath for a human woman and never come back and never apologized for going. "Your father made that same face," he said, "right before he did something incredibly stupid and incredibly brave. I will take that as a compliment. It was not one." But his mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile from a man who did not give them freely. 3 days are up. Safe travels. Uncle. The word hung between them in the morning air. She had never called him that before. Not once in all the years of silence between Kargath and Ashford Cove. Not once since her father died. Kragan's face did something complicated. Surprise first, then something softer. Something that did not have a name in the language they shared because neither of them had ever needed a word for it before. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. "I would not tell him that if he were alive. But he is not. So I can say it without losing face. That might be the kindest thing you have ever said. Do not get used to it. The offer stands. If this place ever stops deserving you, Kargath will be there. I will keep that in mind. And Kragan, thank you for coming. Even if I did not want you to." He nodded once. Then he walked away, his boots heavy on the dock. Bryn watched him until he reached the road and the horses and the riders who had been waiting. Then she turned back to the hull. The council met 3 days after the storm. Town hall, sundown, the room was full. Word had spread through Ashford Cove the way it had always spread. Quickly, incompletely, with embellishments. By the time the story reached the town hall, Bryn had apparently held the entire breakwater together single-handedly while fighting a sea serpent and reciting poetry. The truth was impressive enough without the additions, but people preferred their own versions. Vivian stood at the front, composed, polished. Her silver blonde hair was perfect despite the fact that every other person in the room looked like they had recently survived a storm, because they had. Her voice was measured. Her arguments were prepared. She had been preparing them for 3 months after all. The proposal is simple. The shipyard lease is reviewed and reassigned to provide better service to Ashford Cove. A professional operation, managed properly, with reliable supply chains and modern methods. "Better service," Harlan muttered from the back row. He was sitting next to Declan, both of them looking like men who had things to say and were exercising considerable willpower in not saying them yet. Vivian presented her case. The Cardan Port shipwright, Celine managing the business. The trade deal with Cargath, cheaper materials. She said proper enterprise 3 times. Each time the words landed on Bryn, who was standing against the back wall with her arms crossed and her face unreadable. Then Brennan stood up, the harbor master. The man who loved nothing except tide charts and mooring fees and the precise measurement of water levels. The man who had never once expressed an opinion about anything that did not involve the harbor in a purely technical capacity. The man everyone assumed would vote however the wind was blowing because that was what harbor masters did. If I may, he said. He unrolled a piece of parchment, a technical drawing, the breakwater. Every section marked and labeled. Damage assessment from the storm. Numbers, measurements, the language of fact. Section 4, he said. His voice was dry, professional. The voice of a man presenting evidence because evidence was the only thing he trusted. Built by Garrett, Bryn's father. Rebuilt and maintained by Bryn. Sustained the full force of the storm. Maximum wave height approximately 12 feet. Wind speed approximately 50 knots. Result, the section held. Oda, no structural failure, no loss of integrity. Every spike she drove during the storm is still in place. I checked this morning. He pointed to Section 2 on the drawing. Section 2. Repaired by town contractors last year. Budget approved by this council. Materials sourced from Cardenport. The same Cardenport that Mrs. Vivian proposes we rely on for our future shipwright and our future supplies. Result, Section 2 failed during the storm, would have collapsed entirely if Bryn had not reinforced it during the storm, at personal risk, at the cost of damage to her own shipyard. She chose to save the fishing fleet instead of her own dock. He let that sit. The room was quiet. I have been harbor master for 22 years. In that time, the only structures in this harbor that have never failed are the ones built or maintained by the current shipwright. The breakwater, the main dock, the repair dock, the seawall, all of it, hers or her father's. The things this town built for itself with the contractors and the suppliers and the proper enterprise that Mrs. Vivian admires, those are the things that broke. He rolled up the parchment with the careful precision of a man who had said what he intended to say, and not one word more. You can bring in a shipwright from Cardanport. You can give the yard to anyone you like, but there is not a person in that city or any other who knows this harbor the way she does. Who knows the breakwater? Who knows the tides and the currents and the way the storm come in and what they do when they get here? And the next storm, and there will be a next storm, you had better hope whoever is holding the mallet knows what they are doing. Because last night the person holding the mallet was the same person you are voting to replace. He sat down. Silence. The kind of silence that fills a room when something true has been said, and everyone in the room knows it is true, and some of them wish it were not. Tanith stood, the Chandler, the new council member. The unknown vote. She looked at Vivian, then at Bryn, then at the drawing Brennan had unrolled. I am changing my vote, she said. Her voice was clear. No hesitation. The lease stands. Vivian's face went tight. The edges of her smile sharpened into something that was no longer a smile at all. That as Wessler raised his hand. The old bread seller, 73, half-deaf, famous for falling asleep during sessions, famous for voting on things he did not know about. He was wide awake. I have known that girl since she was 8 years old, he said. His voice was thin but steady, the voice of a man who had decided that this was the moment to be awake and he was not going to waste it. I watched her learn to swing a mallet, watched her bury her father, watched her fix every boat in this harbor, including mine. I fell asleep last time. I am not sleeping now. The lease stands. The vote was called. Brennan, Tanith, Wessler, 3-2. The lease held. Vivian left the hall without speaking to anyone. Her husband followed. The door closed behind them with a sound that was neither loud nor soft, just final. Celine was not there, had not come, had never wanted the shipyard, had never been asked if she did, had been a piece in her mother's game and had not been told the rules. Bryn stood outside the town hall in the dark. The harbor was below her, the breakwater, the shipyard, the light in her cabin that she had left burning, the oak tree behind the yard where her father was buried. All of it still there, still hers. Harlan appeared beside her, clam in his hand. Of course, Welly said. Well, you are staying. I was always staying. The vote just decided whether it would be easy or hard. With you, it is never easy. No, it is not. They stood together looking at the harbor. The water was black and still. The boats rocked gently. The breakwater was a dark line against the darker sky. Holding. How are the clams? Bryn asked. Adequate. He handed her one. She took it. They cracked shells in the dark and ate in silence, and it was enough. It had always been enough. 4 weeks had passed since the day Declan's convoy had limped into the harbor. 4 weeks of mallets and planks in the slow, patient work of putting something broken back together. 4 weeks of learning the difference between a chisel and a gouge, and 100 other differences that had nothing to do with tools. Declan was on the dock when she walked back to the shipyard, sitting on his timber pile, waiting. The wood was worn smooth where he sat every morning. He had left his mark on the yard without meaning to, the way people leave marks on the places where they spend their time. Your lease held, he said. I know. I was there. He smiled. Nervous, hopeful. The smile of a man standing on the edge of something and not sure if the ground beneath him was solid, but standing there anyway. The hull repair is almost done. 2 more days, maybe 3 with the storm damage. And then you leave. And then I leave. The harbor was quiet, the water was calm. The storm had passed and left behind the kind of stillness that only comes after violence. Everything washed clean. Everything revealed. Unless, Declan said. Unless what? Unless I find a reason to stay. A trade route through Ashford Cove. Seasonal birth. Something. You are looking for an excuse. I am looking for a reason. There is a difference, is there? An excuse is something you tell other people. A reason is something you tell yourself. Bryn reached for her mallet. Declan reached it first, holding it out handle first, the right way, the way she had taught him without meaning to, without knowing she was teaching anything at all. Strength looks good on you, he said. Same words, but this time he said them the way you would say the tide comes in or the sun sets in the west. Something simply and observably true. Not a compliment, not a curiosity, not a comparison to livestock, not something exotic to stare at, not something to be fixed or solved or debated, just a fact about a woman who was strong and who was beautiful in her strength and who had earned every muscle and every scar and every callus on her hands through years of work that would have broken lighter people. Bryn took the mallet. She looked at him for a long moment, his blue-gray eyes, the burn scar on his hand, the lean patience of a man who had learned to carry his losses instead of running from them, who had learned it slowly, who was still learning. I know, she said. Not thank you, not you too, not any of the things a person says when they need someone else's words to feel whole. Just I know, because she did know, had always known. The strength was hers, had always been hers, built by her own hands on her own dock, in her own shipyard, in her own harbor, in the town where she was born, and where her father was buried, and where she would stay. She did not need anyone to tell her it looked good. She needed someone who could see it without flinching, without comparing, without turning it into something about themselves. And he could, and that was enough. Declan smiled, not hoping to be accepted, not asking for anything, understanding that those 2 words were worth more than any other answer she could have given. Bryn drove the first nail of the new day. The mallet rang clean, high, right, the sound of wood finding its place, the sound that meant the fit was true. Harlan sat on his crate with his net across his lap and his eyes on the harbor, and his silence saying everything his mouth did not. He did not speak. He just sat in the morning sun, listening, present, there, the way he had been there every morning for years. The way he would be there tomorrow and the morning after that and all the mornings that followed until the crate gave out or he did. The harbor stretched out behind them, battered and patched and standing, not perfect, but there, scarred by storms and held together by spikes driven in the dark by a woman who chose it over everything else she could have had. A home that did not always know how to say welcome but was learning. Slowly, the way all important things are learned. Bryn worked. The mallet rose and fell. The planks fit, the nails sang, The hull took shape beneath her hands. New wood meeting old, damage becoming repair, broken becoming whole. Somewhere behind her, Harlan cracked a clam. Somewhere beside her, Declan held a brace steady without being asked. His grip did not slip. Somewhere beyond the breakwater, the Atlantic rolled on vast and indifferent, carrying its own weight the way it always had. But inside the harbor, the water was calm, and the shipyard was standing. And the woman who built it was still there, not because anyone had asked her to stay, not because a vote had gone her way, not because an uncle had offered her a different life, or a man had told her she was strong, or an old fisherman had brought her clams in the rain. Because some things do not need asking. Some things do not need permission. Some things do not need a vote, or a voice, or a hand raised in a crowded room. Some things just are. Bryn swung the mallet. The sound rang out across the harbor, clean and high and right. The sound of wood finding its place. The sound of something being built by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And Harlan heard it, and Declan heard it, and the harbor heard it, and the breakwater that her father had built and she had saved heard it, and it sounded like home.